So, Enlisted has just added the French Resistance Squad, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about how Enlisted is going to be adding France, or how they could add France, and what they are most likely going to do with adding France. In my personal opinion, this is the 3 best ways in which Enlisted could add France, and if you haven't figured out by now, you already know my favorite way of adding the French. So, without further ado, this is the likeliest possibility of how Enlisted is going to add France in the tech tree, based on what we have given right now. That said, without further ado, let's get started. Starting with what we have right now in the customization for the French resistance squads, we can see that they don't have the Adrian helmet, which is the French Adrian helmet now we have from World War I, and a modified version of the Adrian used in World War II, aka both variants are not there in game. We do have a lot of French weapons such as the Mass 36 and Labelle 1886. Now this was already in the game before this set French Resistance Squad, and there have also been reported quote-unquote French voice lines via the paratrooper voice line, so that's going to be interesting. And of course, with this squad we already have the French voice lines, so I'm guessing Enlisted is definitely going to be adding in France, at least the French squads in some way. For them, it's just not going to be profitable if you do voice lines and essentially, well, you only use it for 1 or 2 squads. It just doesn't make sense. Hence, here are the 3 ways from what we have given that France is going to be added in Enlisted. And that number 1 is they're only going to add French squads, which is essentially what they kind of have right now, except for this is the second French squad. The first one being the Moroccan squad that we already have in game, and in my opinion, this is one of the dumbest and probably the worst ways you can add France, because, well, for one, it's only 2 squads, and one of them is already an event squad, and the second one is a premium squad you can't even buy right now, so it's, for Enlisted, a loss of money, and for us, very, well, just sad. On the other hand, the second way that they can add France is via its own faction and tech tree, essentially add an entire new tech tree for France, and give us French squads decked out with French squads for that specific faction, and do not have other factions in that tech tree. Essentially what the Soviet Union has right now, except for one for France, so that's that. Overall, in my opinion, this is one of my things that I really want for Enlisted to do, and honestly, it should come as no surprise that I want this to happen. And of course, this is probably the most likeliest outcome, which is number 3, and that is the free-to-play French squads are going to be added via the American tech tree, or the USA tech tree. Essentially, these are going to be added exactly like how the British are going to be added. They're going to be added via the tech tree, and essentially what's going to happen is that they're going to be added for some of the squads, which is kind of not the case than what we need right now. For one, we already have enough American and British squads. As a matter of fact, I would say we already have enough American squads, and I would say that British squads are lacking, and I personally suggest Enlisted to put Italy and the United Kingdom in their own separate tech trees. I think that's much better for the game, and if Enlisted goes along with this quote-unquote putting French free-to-play squads in the American tech tree, I think it's a very bad idea, not only because you wasted a massive opportunity, but because I think Enlisted just does so much better if you put a French with their own tech tree. Of course, there has to be several caveats before Enlisted can even start putting France in a tech tree. They have to do the work, they have to do a lot of importing from War Thunder, because let's be honest, most of the tanks and planes they got from War Thunder, so at this point it's not really that big of a deal. And on the other hand, they have to get more players, because if you haven't figured out right now, there are 4 factions Enlisted, with the Americans and the British, the Soviets, the Germans, and the Japanese. If you want to add another French tech tree, then I highly suggest you need more players and then put in the French tech tree. Because if you put in the French tech tree, either what's going to happen is that everyone's just going to be playing France, and then after like a month, no one's going to be playing France. Unless me. So that's that. In a serious note, I do think Enlisted's best option is to add France as its own tech tree. For one, France has a lot of weapons. Same thing for the Italians and the British. I think they also deserve their own tech tree, which if you can't see by now, that's already essentially 7 tech trees if we add the French. So that's going to be a big issue for Enlisted. Enlisted just doesn't have the player base as of right now. It is growing, and it is growing at a good pace, I would say, but it's just not growing as the pace you would expect from things like War Thunder, because that thing is growing a lot. But that said, that's how Enlisted is going to add France. If you haven't liked, subscribe, or join the Discord, highly suggest that you do. But that's it, I'll see you in the next one.